In this video, I'm going to start talking about some of the more detailed views in the project. I'm on one of the pages of your textbook, page 369, and I'm going up to 368 here, which is showing some blow-ups or call-outs for a typical cavity wall. And as we go down here, you can see that our wall section has some similarity to what you see here, but also some differences. We're going to start with working with the foundation and the area above the foundation here where the masonry is sitting on top of this foundation wall. So we'll be adding bricks and concrete block and some of these fill patterns to indicate various kinds of materials. Click on the checkbox. Okay, so we don't see much here except this not very perfectly drawn topographic area or topographic surface. I'm going to go to my sections. I'm going to go to the masonry wall section. All right, so what I can see now is that an earth pattern has been brought in and that it's -6 inches below what we're calling level 1. All right, that's the first thing that we need to do. Second thing is we're going to increase the size of the cavity. Right now I've got 2 inches of rigid insulation and a 1-inch gap. I'm going to increase the size of this air gap. So I'm going to go to edit type, edit, and I'm going to change the thermal air layer to 2 inches. Click on OK and apply OK. And you should see that that's a little bit wider. Now, we may come back at some point and add an interior finish to this, but for now we'll leave it as it is. So basically that interior finish would cover this gap between the slab and the foundation wall. Okay, in the instructions, there was a gravel pattern that there was a link to it that you hopefully downloaded that to your machine. If you haven't, go ahead and do that. What we're going to do is we're going to bring that into the Revit model. So I'm going to go to additional settings. So I'm going to go to additional settings and fill patterns. And from there, I'm going to go down to where it says new fill pattern and custom. All right, when you click on the custom radio button, you're going to get an opportunity to browse to find the file. It should be in my downloads. There's gravel pattern. I'm going to open it. And one thing I want to change is the scale. I think those little gravel pieces are too big. So I'm going to change it to 0.25, and then I'm going to click on OK and OK. Okay, so the way that you make these, way you can use these fill patterns is you create a region and you basically fill it with that particular pattern. So you'll find the tool for making regions on the Annotate tab. So just for example, if I click on region here and I make a rectangle, okay, I had been playing around with different patterns here. So let's say I go with vertical lines and then I click on the check mark. That area that I've created is going to fill with that particular fill pattern. So what I want to do here is I want to make about 6 inches of that gravel underneath my slab. So first what I'm going to do is create a detail line here. And I'm going to move that line. Now I can't see all of it because it is outside of the crop window. I'm just going to move it down to 6 inches. Okay. And I'll erase that later, but basically what I want to do, go back to annotate, create a region, make a rectangle to serve as the boundaries of the region. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to move this line over a little bit so I can grab it later and delete it. Go to annotate, region, and create a rectangle. And I can let it extend a little bit past, I'll have to sort of move that over, my crop window, because I may end up moving the crop window later. But I mean, you could make it stop a little bit closer to that. And then I'm going to move it over like this. I'll move it over 1/2 inch. So it goes all the way to the face of the slab. And right now, I've got the vertical lines assigned to it. What I'm going to do is create a new fill pattern. I'm going to duplicate, and I'm going to call this one gravel. And say okay. And then I'll have to designate the fill pattern for it. So I should see the new one that I brought in. It's called gravel 2. I think that was what it was named before I changed the name to gravel pattern. And I'll say okay, and I'll say okay. And then when I click on the checkbox, it should fill it with that particular pattern. And it's going to cover up part of the earth tone we have there. Okay. So that will be a gravel pattern, and we'll also put some gravel underneath this footing, but we won't make it like this nice clean rectangle. We'll do it with a kind of more of a polyline. Go back to annotate, region, and this time instead of using one of these completed shapes, I'll just go around and kind of make an odd shaped polyline, and again I'll click on the checkbox. So now I've got those 2 areas of my gravel fill.
So we will be developing some of these wall sections and plan details to look something similar to what you see here. So these are based on a model, or they were constructed from Revit, but there's a lot of additional information that needs to be applied to those relationships, those intersections between floors and walls and roofs, etc. You know, some things that you'll notice is there's a lot more detail. There are also certain line weights that are being utilized that wouldn't necessarily be part of, you know, the way that you would construct a foundation or a footing, or, you know, a wall that has concrete block and brick, etc. So these are kind of applied over the top of the kind of call outs that we've generated. And you'll notice that there are, in addition to some of these annotations, these notes, you know, mortar net, for example, dimension strings, that there are some variations in line weight. We have some hidden lines here that represent reinforcing. We have other hidden lines that represent things beyond. We have heavier line weights for some of the more customized detail items. Revit will provide certain 2D modules or components for certain things, like these concrete blocks are built out of Revit family components, but we'll also have to come in and kind of customize them a little bit. So in preparation for this work, we're going to need to generate some line types. So what I'm going to do is go to the Manage tab, and on the Manage tab, you'll see an option to open up some additional settings, including line styles. Before we do that, though, let's take a look at the line weights. Okay, so these are the default line weights, and you could change these. You could assign a certain thickness to, we'll call this like pen map number 1. You could give it a thickness that's, wider or thinner than what we see here. And you can specify thicknesses based on certain scales. Now, the 3/4 inch scale is one that's not here, but it will generate these variations in line weights as we begin to work with them. Line weight 1 is the lightest, and as we go up, you can see that the thickness is getting thicker. These are based on inches because that's the increment or the template that we're working off of. So we'll be working with, some of these lower numbered line weight designations. We'll have a line weight 1, 2, 3, 4, but we probably won't get into these heavier line weights. When you print them to PDF, they just are too heavy. But this will give us some sense of, if when we use these thicknesses, some variation that will help us to give hierarchy to the details. So things that are more important or larger will have a heavier pen weight than things that are minor or of a lesser importance. So again, we'll go to the additional settings here and go to line styles. And if you click on this little plus symbol, you'll see there are a whole bunch of default line types, and these are assigned to different things. We won't get into the details about that now. We're going to be creating some new ones. So in order to do that, so where it says modify subcategories, there's this new option. We'll create a few new ones, and then we'll begin to draw some objects in the wall section and assign these line weights to them. So I'm going to create a new one here called hidden 1/8 and 4. Now these are just names, so we'll actually change the settings for these after we've created the subcategory. Okay, so hidden 1/8, 4. We'll change the line weight, and the way that I'm naming these is just to help identify what they are when you start to assign line weights to things. We always want things to appear in black. And for the line pattern, this one is going to be center. But as I've noted here, hidden 1/8, we want it to be hidden 1/8. So I'm trying to use the names to sort of identify the settings, right? And we'll create another new one. The next new one will be called hidden 1/16, and it will have the pen number 3 assigned to it, or the thickness 3 assigned to it, right? And I'll change that number here, 3 and 1/16. Okay, and I'll just continue going on here. I'm going to have one that is called hidden 3/32. And again, those fractions that we're looking at are basically just like the size that they'll appear on the printed sheet. Hidden 3/32, 3. Okay, let's make this 3, and we'll scroll down to hidden 3/32. Okay, we'll create another one. And in AutoCAD, if you're more familiar with that, the line type for lines that don't have any dashes or any breaks in them are called continuous. In Revit, they're referred to as solid. So we'll call this solid 3. We don't need to give that fraction because these are continuous lines that don't have breaks in them. Let's change this one to 3. And it's already solid, and I'll create, for the time being, one more called solid 2. And I will assign the second weight to that and say apply and OK. Right now we have some line types that we can work with as we begin to add more detail to the drawing. Okay. Next thing that we're going to do is bring in some concrete block. So Revit generates a wall assembly and basically suggests that a certain thickness within the wall represents a certain kind of material or a certain kind of building component. But when it comes to doing the details, you really need something that looks a little bit more like concrete block. So we're going to bring in some concrete block. I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to load Autodesk Family and type in concrete masonry unit. Right now, you'll see a bunch of options here, different types. Some of them are in plan view, like this one right here. This is a bond beam. Some of them are in section, and that's what we're going to need for our wall section. So there are different types within those. There is a bond beam, and we may be using one of these a little bit later. Then there's some that identify, the number of cores. Now, ours is going to have 2 cores, so we're going to be using this one. But if you scroll down here, just for your information, there are some different types, including like this is referred to as a split face CMU section. It just has a rough texture, and in this case, maybe you want that because you want it exposed. If you're going to cover the CMU up with some other materials like we have in our drawings, you would just use the standard type. So I'm going to load that in here. And then under Annotate, I'm going to go to Component and look up the detail components. And you'll see that a whole bunch of blocks were brought in. The module that we'll be working with are the standard 8-inch high by 8-inch deep by 16 inches long. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to come over here and place it. Now, we want there to be a joint at the bottom. So you really just want to click at the bottom where the top of the foundation wall is. All right, so basically we're going to make copies of this. Now, maybe it would have been better to do this before we kind of cut the section up into units, but we can still make this happen fairly easily. First thing I'm going to do is just check my measurement here. So when I measure from the bottom to the top, I'm getting basically 27 feet, okay? Now you'll notice here that when we thickened the wall that now the cap doesn't fit right, and we'll make that adjustment as well. But basically you could make copies of this. You could also use the array tool, which maybe is easier, and you'd have to do the math. If I remember, these are 8 inches tall. So if I took 27 feet, which is my height, and multiply it times 12, so I've converted it to inches, and then I divide that number by 8 inches, I should get the number of blocks needed for the array. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to go to the array tool, and where it says number, I'm going to put 40. I've gone ahead and done this math already, 40. Okay. And then I will pick a point and input 8 inches, constraining it to the vertical dimension. Okay, so there they are. And what we'll see here is that we have a gap at the top. Typically when you're doing masonry buildings, you want to make the module work with whatever the unit is. we could make the building, the walls of that surround the cavity structure taller or shorter. I'm going to click on this wall element, and when I scroll down, so it has a top constraint up to level 3, and then it's above that 3 feet. So I've got 3 feet here above. We're just going to change this value to 2 feet. How high would you make it? Well, it kind of depends. Let's say you were going to put a roof terrace up here and you had some pavers. You might want to set the height so that you have a safe parapet height for the walls of a terrace. So generally speaking, they want to be 40 inches above that top surface. We haven't really gotten into what the plan for this structure is, so I'm just going to drop this to 2 feet 8 inches and assume that people aren't going to be up there gathering. Now, I changed for this one, but as you know, there are 4 walls surrounding this. So when I go to 3D view and zoom in here, and see now the other 3 walls are still at the height that I had originally drawn them. All right, so I'm going to make that same change to all of them. 8 inches, apply. Okay, so now you should see that the corners are joining like they should. All right, and I'll go back to my wall section. All right, so I'm back in the wall section. Now I'm going to work on this cap at the top of the wall. So I've scrolled down to the section that has all of the families, and I found parapet cap precast, and I noticed that there are a bunch of sizes here. So, you know, I've got a wall here that's now 1'3 1/4. I've got an overhang on this side of 1 inch. So basically, I need to make the parapet cap extend beyond in this direction. And what I'm going to do is make 1 inch on this side, and it will extend 3/4 of an inch on the other side. I could also center it on there too. That would make it, so that means that the cap would be a total of 15 inches, no, rather 17 inches, and it would be symmetrical about here. So that would be 7/8 of an inch and 7/8 of an inch. Maybe we'll do that instead. Okay, so I'm going to go down to where it says 16 inch wide, and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to call this 17 inches wide. Now, you may have to work with whatever the manufacturer. Basically, you'd go find a manufacturer of these products and work within whatever dimensions they have available. So it could be that the 17 inches is not one that they have, and you would just substitute it out for a different type, a different size, and change your offset dimension. All right, so to change the shape of it, I'm going to go into, I'm double clicked on that particular family, and my wall width, I'm going to say, is 1 3/4. So I'll put in 3.25, and then I'll make my overhang 7/8 of an inch, which is the same thing as 0.875. Okay, and say okay. All right, now it hasn't changed because I need to still assign it to that. So I'm going to click on the wall. I'm going to click on edit type. I'm going to go to edit the structure. It's going to show me the view of the plan, and I'm going to change that to the section. Remember that these components that you add to a wall are referred to as sweeps. So I'll go back to the sweeps list, and here I'm going to change it to 17 inch, the 17 inch one that I just made. I'm going to say okay, apply, and okay, and let's see if the change gets made. There we go. So, you know, we have just shy of an inch overhang. Now we want that there because when water comes down the edge, we need for it to drip off. We don't want it to kind of come back into the joint. So we'll perhaps come back a little later and add something called a drip.
All right, so now we have our block in there. And the next thing that we're going to be adding is the brick. So I'm going to go to insert again, load Autodesk family, and this time look up brick. Right, we want bricks in section. Okay, let's load them in. Okay, and then go back. Again, this is a detail component. So I go to annotate and I select the components under that menu. And I'm going to come down here and place that. Now these are standard bricks. So if you recall, 3 of them equals 8 inches. So it would be a lot more difficult to kind of do the array with them as individual units. So what I'm going to do is make 2 copies. So I'll use the copy tool and place them using that snap, the endpoint function. And then what I'm going to do is click on them, holding down the control key. And I am going to go to annotate and I'm going to create a group. We're going to call this 3 bricks. And I'm going to say, okay. Right. Now, when I click on it, they all are selected because they're not part of this group. And I'll do the same process of creating an array. It's going to be the same number of items. Oops. Click on it. Go to the array tool, 40. Again, you know, we want these joints to align, and that's one reason why we're working with this size brick. And I will go up 8 inches to set spacing for the array. So check. One thing you'll notice here is that I've got this top concrete masonry unit, but there's no joint between the cap and the block. So we can't have that. We need to have some mortar at the top of this, and we'll have some flashing that comes through. So we're going to make a little adjustment to the wall like I had done before. Maybe we'll just do this directly in 3D. Let me go up to the 3D view. And I'm going to click on each of them, holding down the control key. And for the height, I'm just going to add 3/8 of an inch joint. Okay, now I'll go back to my section. I have a little joint there that I can work with. Okay, moving right along here. We're going to now add a hidden line inside the slab that will represent the welded wire reinforcing. Now, typically in a detail, this would be shown with this hidden line or dash line type. We created a few special line types under additional settings. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the ones that we made. We're going to make the line for this particular object or component. We're going to use this one that's 332nd-3. Okay, so how do I go about doing that? I go to the Annotate tab. I make a detail line, and it's going to default to these thin lines. I'm going to look for the one called Hidden 3/32. All right, now I'll draw it on the bottom, and then I'll move it up into place. Okay, so I made it a little bit longer than the crop window, and I've selected it. And it's kind of hard because you can't see it on top of all the other line work. I'm going to move it up 2 inches. Okay. And then I'm also going to move it over. So there's a little bit of a gap between the edge of the slab. I'll move it over 2 inches too. Okay. Now that's just to make it clear that it's an element that's kind of floating within that slab assembly. and slightly to the bottom. You know, typically when you're putting in reinforcing, you're going to have things closer to the bottom because it has to resist some of the tensile forces as it would do in a beam. Okay, so it'll be slightly to the bottom there. So there is our welded wire reinforcing. So this is an AutoCAD drawing that includes some reinforcing. Now this is mirrored. Our exterior on this one is on the right side and the interior is on the left. These green lines that you see are the reinforcing. So we've already added the welded wire reinforcing. That's part of the slab assembly. We'll also have some vertical reinforcing that will extend into the foundation wall and into the footing. In this case, they're likely going, in opposite directions, one traveling to the right, one to the left. You'll also notice that there are some rebar running horizontally. That's what we're looking at right here. Now remember that rebar is designated in numbers, and each number indicates 1/8 of an inch. So a number 4 is 4/8 of an inch, which is the same thing as 1/2 inch in diameter. These ones here are 3/4 of an inch, so they would be number 6s. Numbers, 6 divided by 8 reduces down to 3/4. So we'll include the configuration that you see here. We'll have 3 reinforcing members on the bottom, 2 in the bottom of the foundation wall, and 2 towards the top. Okay, so maybe what we'll do is we will start with the dashed line reinforcing, and we'll get those into the Revit file. Let's go on to the Revit file. Here we are. Okay. So we need to use a different line type for this. So I'm going to switch. I'm going to do a detail line, but I'm going to switch to a thicker one. All right, so now I will add that vertical reinforcing. I'm going to go to annotate to the detail line. And the first line that I'm going to make will be a horizontal line down here. And then I'm going to, when you make this, make sure you change your line type to hidden 1/8-4. It'll be slightly heavier than that welded wire reinforcing. I'm going to move it up 3 inches here. You do that again. Click on the line, move 3 inches. Okay. And I'm also going to move it over 2 inches. Move 2 inches. And I'll create another detail line. Again, making sure hidden 1/8 is selected as my line style. And I'll bring that down. And then what I'm going to do is fillet these 2 lines. So I'm going to go to the detail line tool, click on fillet, and then select the 2. Okay, up here where it says radius, you can click on that and choose 3 inches. So it will place it on one side or the other of that line. We want to do it on this side because we've already set this 2 inches. All right, so now what I'm going to do is hold down Control and pick those 2 lines, and I'll use the mirror command to make a copy. All right, so this reinforcing, and then let's take this one and let's bring it down a little bit so it doesn't protrude to the top of the wall. We want it to have coverage of the concrete, 4 feet 4 inches. Okay, so that is my vertical reinforcing that turns into the footing. You'll see all different configurations for this. And how do you know what to do? Well, sometimes it's more like rule of thumb, what's common practice where you're working. Could be that your structural engineer has ways that he or she likes to detail these conditions. It also is going to depend on the condition of the soil. How much reinforcing do I need? If the soil is really unstable, you may have to provide more reinforcing. Right. I'm also going to add rebar that's running in the horizontal direction. And, so keeping in mind that rebar comes in numbered sizes. Each number is basically 1/8 of an inch. So I'll add 3 along the bottom, and it's not going to be symmetrical. One will be sort of offset here, but that will give us a sense of how much reinforcing is necessary. Okay, so the reinforcing is another Autodesk family. So I can type in reinforcing here, and if I scroll down, I'll find reinforcing bar section, and I can load that. So back in annotate, again, go to components, detail component, and there's going to be different sizes. If I want a number 6 bar, which following the rule about 1/8 of an inch, that size rebar would be 3/4 of an inch, 6/8. And I'm going to start to move it around a little bit. I'll move it up 1 inch, and I'll move it over, say, another inch. Okay, and I'll make one over here, and I'll also add one coming down the middle here. It'll be, like I said, slightly offset. Okay, so this one, click on it, copy. I won't give it a specific dimension. I just want it to be roughly in the middle there. And then for this one, I can mirror it. We'll add another one. So I'll make a copy of this. These are all going to be the same size. Here. Move it over 3 and up 3. Maybe I can mirror them to the top. I'm going to do that. No, I'll just make a copy of them. See how 30 inches looks. A little bit further up. 6 inches. Okay. So that is the rebar for the foundation. And now what I'm going to do is run some reinforcing up the cores of these concrete blocks. So I'll go back to the detail line, and I'm going to go back to my heavy hidden line, and I'll click there, and we'll make this 27 feet. Okay, let's just make sure it shows through all of them, and then I'll bring it down a little. Let's try 2 feet to 6. Okay, that's the reinforcing that's going up through the cores. Next thing that we're going to add is a drain tile. It says here 4-inch diameter perforated drain pipe. The old ones were typically made out of clay, and I suppose that's why they're called drain tiles. This one will actually be a more contemporary material, but basically what happens is you're trying to get water away from the foundation. So any water that spills into the space will be carried away. They tend to place them surrounded by gravel, again, to help with the drainage. So this one is reversed. Ours will be on the exterior side, like this one is, but our exterior is on the left. Okay, so instead of making the perforated pipe first, we'll make a region that has some gravel in it, and then we'll place the drain in it, because the way that these regions work, you kind of want the certain things to be on top of others. So we want the gravel to be behind. So I'm going to go to region. Currently my region type is this gravel one. So I can just begin to create a boundary. Now I'll have to revise the outline of it. Right now I just want to kind of roughly place in an area here. So it's going to snap to that end. I don't want it to go above the ground. I want to pull this down a little bit. There it goes. And then I'll bring this one down to the end point of it. Okay, so it should have some coverage of soil, and I'll hit the check mark. Now it gets filled with gravel. All right, for the tile, or the pipe, rather, we need to create a new region. So I'm going to go to the region tool here, and I'll just take a look and see what I have. I have one called solid black. Let's choose that one, and then we'll revise it, or we'll create a duplicate. Edit type, duplicate, duplicate, and I'm going to call it solid white. Okay. Okay, so what I have to do is under where it says solid fill drafting, is choose no pattern and say okay, and apply and okay. Okay, now just to sort of test this out, I'm going to make a circle here with its radius 2 inches. When you hit the check mark, you should see that it's now a solid filled circle. Okay, and what you can do is create another one, annotate. Make a circle, same center as that one, and we'll give some thickness to it. The radius for this one will be 2.25. Check mark. All right, now I need to bring this one to the front. So we want that middle one to bring to the front. All right, so now we should see the thickness of it. Now I'm going to select both of those circles and move them. I want to place them relatively close to the side of the foundation wall. And so they should look something like that. How far away? I would just try it graphically to show them roughly the dimension that I have here. So let me just double check it for you. About 3-4 inches or so. Okay. That's the drain tile. And next we'll add a few more other components to the foundation. So next what we're going to do is we're going to add a key. So you may recall that a key is basically a little notch in the footing that basically is a way to kind of lock in the foundation into the footing. So sometimes what they'll do is put a 2x4 in the wet concrete, let the concrete cure, and then remove that 2x4. So there's this void left. We're going to go ahead and add something that basically breaks this line. The way I'm going to do it is create a new region with the concrete material assigned to it, and basically we'll cover up the line. So I'm going to go to region, and I'm going to click on edit type. I'm going to duplicate it, and this one I'm going to call concrete. Concrete. Okay. And for the fill pattern, I'm going to look for concrete and say okay. And okay. All right, now how big should this be? Again, 2x4s are often used to form them. So nominally 2 inches by 4 inches. It doesn't really matter, it just needs to be proportionally somewhat close to that. Okay, so now that we have the region of the concrete defined within it, we can make a key. I'm going to create a rectangle that is 2 by 4. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just more graphically to illustrate the idea. And I'm going to hit check mark. I'm going to move it into position. So I'll move it over 2 inches. And I'll click on it and edit the boundary. Click on the top line here and change that top line to invisible line and click on the check mark. All right, so we're seeing the line of the top of footing datum here, but the line that represents the bottom of the foundation wall should not appear. So we'll double check that when we come back and print. If there's a problem, we can adjust it a little bit, but that's your key. And again, it's just the concrete of the foundation wall filling in that notch. All right, the next thing that we'll draw are the horizontal ladder ties that basically they join the 2 withes together, the withe of the CMU and the withe of the brick. So in this detail, this AutoCAD detail, you can see there's a graphic used for it. Ours will be a little bit more simplified. You could draw one that has this level of detail if you like, but I think at the scale we're drawing that a single line work one will be fine. So one thing you'll notice is that they're not at every joint of the CMU. Typically it's every other, but this again will depend on the specific nature of the structure that you're detailing. And this is something that you might get some feedback from your structural engineer. But generally speaking, every other course is adequate. Okay, so I'm going to go to the Annotate tab, to the Detail lines, and I'm going to change my line type to medium lines. And I'll begin to draw something that graphically represents those ties. I'll make a line all the way across, and then I'll take that line and I'll move it down so it's centered 3/16 an inch, since my joints are 3/8. And I'll bring this in a little bit. Same thing on the other side. I'll bring this in a little ways. Okay, now I'm also going to make a couple of little circles. The radius, just to give them some thickness. Let's try maybe 1 by 3/32. Yeah. And I'll make a copy of that. Okay. So those would be the ones that are running continuously through the joints. Okay. And then I'll make something to represent that attachment that allows the two to kind of join together, the ones that fit in the brick and the ones that fit in the CMU. Okay, so going back to my detail lines, and I'll do a snap override for nearest. Again, I just want to sort of illustrate something that would help to define that. Okay, so now I'm ready to take all of these elements and turn them into a detail group. So I'll go ahead and hold down the Control key and pick all of them. And go to Annotate, Detail Group, Create Group. And this is going to be, I'll call it a horizontal. So now when I click on it, it's now part of one group. What I can do is copy it. So I got it in the second course here. And I can just continue to copy it up the wall. Well, actually, let's do it as an array. And we have to erase the top one. I'll click on it, do an array. I'm going to, instead of 40, I will half it since it's every other course. 20. And then my distance instead of every 8 inches will be 16 inches. So if you get to the top, let's go check and see where we are. Yeah, we would not need that one at the top of the wall. The flashing that is used in that joint. We've got these regions, and the same way that I had you erase the top of that key, I'm going to do the same thing with these regions. I'm going to edit the boundary, and I'm going to change that bottom line to an invisible line and hit the check mark. And so again, it's not like there's anything forming that line. I'll do the same thing with this one, edit boundary. And I'll hold down the control key and I'll go around and erase these ones on the bottom, change those to invisible lines, check mark. Okay. Same thing with this one, edit boundary, click, 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 click. Invisible lines, check mark. And so it'll just be like a rough area, because again, it's not something that's measured. So next we'll draw the flashing. So these images come from your textbook. And although we have a slightly different condition, I think they serve as good 3D illustrations of what we're drawing. So the flashing is going to go under the CMU or within one of the joints of the CMU, not under. It's going to drop down the face of the CMU and then come underneath the brick, and there should be a little bit of it that sticks out past the face of the brick. So in our detail, that flashing is going to be in this joint. It's going to drop down, and then it's going to travel underneath the brick and a little bit of it out here. So we'll draw this with detail lines, similar to how we did the horizontal tie up here. So I'm going to go to the detail line tool, and this will also be a medium line. And I will start by drawing a line along the top of the joint, and then I'm going to move it down 3/16 so it's centered in the joint, and then I'll just make it a little bit shorter than that. Let's try 6 inches. I see it's like, we'll then move it over 2 inches. Let's try that again. Move it 1 inch, and then I'll drag it a little bit past here. Okay, so there'll be a lot of lines on top of lines here, and it's just, you know, some of these lines are going to be heavier than others, and so they don't have to be precise, and sometimes you don't know exactly what needs to happen with them until you see it printed. So let me draw another line here. And then I'm going to take this and move it also down 3/16 of an inch. Let those two join there, and then one more line that will just kind of draw at a slight angle there. Again, the idea is that any water that happens to get into the cavity will come above the flashing and make its way out. And there should be some weep holes also between the bricks
that will help to remove the water. Next, we'll be drawing something called a mortar net. So on this page, you can see a few examples of how these are installed. Basically, what's happening is when the brick is being laid, sometimes some of the mortar falls into that cavity. And so the mortar net is used to keep, here's a weep hole right here, is used to keep those weep holes clear of any mortar. So they go in between the insulation, which is this blue stuff here, and the brick, and they would fill in whatever airspace is there at the bottom or just above the flashing. So we're going to make basically a rectangle down here, and we're going to put a hatch pattern in it just to sort of distinguish it from our rigid insulation. So first thing I need to do is go to the region tool under annotate, and I'll find one, let's say this diagonal crosshatch, and I'll edit the type, and I will duplicate it and call it basically a small crosshatch, maybe small, and say okay. And then up here, I'm going to look for like maybe it was already assigned that pattern. Okay, we'll see how this one looks, but we'll at least have one that's identified as the crosshatch. And then I'm going to create a rectangle. And again, the dimensions for this aren't terribly important. This is really just used for illustration purposes. Okay. See how it shrank there. I'm going to see if I can pull that up. Yeah. All right, so it's going to have a slightly different graphic than the rigid insulation. You know, we'll see how that looks when we print it. We may want to change the graphic just a little bit. I'm going to raise it, give it a little space between the flashing. If you like, you could even drag it in a little bit to give it a little bit of room. So, okay. So that will just keep mortar from filling the weep holes. So I'm in your textbook. Page 369 is a detail that looks at a parapet flashing. Well, and then some other components of the parapet. So again, the parapet is this piece of the wall that extends above the roof. And in our cavity wall, we have one of these. So we're going to add to our detail this flashing. So there are joints in the parapet cap, and sometimes water can get through. So what this flashing is doing is preventing that water from getting into the cavity itself or, you know, into the CMU. So we'll include that. There's also something here called counter flashing. So basically, and this roof is different than what we have too, but basically there's a roof membrane that rolls up the wall, and the counter flashing comes over the top of it. Again, this is to keep water from getting underneath the membrane. Okay, so we'll be adding those to our detail. Okay, so for the flashing, you basically want to draw a line down the middle of the joint, and then it should have a little tail that turns down. So I'm going to go to the detail line, and this can be on a medium line also. And I'll draw it across here, and then I'll click on it, and I will move it up 3/16 of an inch, so it's centered in the joint. Okay, and I'll also add a line that, you know, doesn't have to be perfectly precise. It's just going to stick out a little bit. And then I'll take that line and I will mirror it. So I'm going to try to click on it, mirror it.
And then we have to, there we go. There it is. So there's the flashing. Now, some of the details shown in the textbook are a little bit simplified. There's maybe other components that would be part of this assembly. For example, we don't really have any information about what kind of CMU, is a CMU or is it some other kind of product? Also, we don't know how this top cap is attached to this the structural element here. So I'm going to share with you another view of this AutoCAD file. Now, again, this is mirrored, so our exterior side is on the opposite side. But what I wanted to point out is that we have something called a bond beam that's happening just underneath this cap. And there's also a stainless steel pin that is tying that top cap to the wall. So we're going to add both of those items to our detail. Okay, so for the bond beam, this is something that you'll need to go to Insert, Load Autodesk Family, and let's type in bond beam. And this single section bond beam is what we want. So I'm going to load that in here. And I'm going to delete the regular or standard concrete block. And I'm going to add the component of the bond beam. Let's see if we have the right size here. Component. And go to your pull down menu and choose the 8x8. And there's our bond beam. Okay. So we'll add a pin using our heavy reinforcing line type. So I'm going to go to detail line. I'm going to change this to hidden 1/8. And I'll start off just roughly drawing it in, and then I'll change this dimension to 6.5 maybe. And I did not this inches and feet. Okay, and so that will just appear as a slightly heavier line. And you may maybe notice from the AutoCAD file that there's a little hole that's basically in the underside of this coping element that the pin would sit in. And I'm also going to add a rebar member. So I'm going to go to components here and look for reinforcing bars. And I'll use another number 6 in there. Maybe it's a little big. Fine. Okay, so that's kind of what's necessary to kind of cap off that wall. And by the way, the bond beam basically is they sit in a row. You put the reinforcing in and you fill them with grout, and they become basically like a beam. Whereas some of these members might be hollow. This would be continuously filled with grout. Okay, I'm referring again to your textbook. There's something called a Cant strip. So that's basically this triangular piece here. Now, in this detail, this Cant strip is made out of wood. In ours, it would just be made up out of rigid insulation that's been cut to form this kind of slope here. And basically the idea is with the membrane. Now this membrane is different than the one we'll be detailing. We'll be using a single ply. You can see this is a built up one. There's multiple layers here, but that membrane is going to go up alongside the cant and then underneath a counter flashing. Okay.
So basically what we'll be drawing next is this kind of filled area that has rigid insulation in it that forms this. If the membrane just went over and then turned up, it could crack. So this is just easing that bend a little bit. So you can see that Cant strip in this AutoCAD detail right here. So it's basically like the rigid insulation, just, you know, has a little piece that sits on top there. And again, the membrane is coming up and then going underneath this counter flashing. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need to draw a kind of triangular piece that will be situated there at the joint of the rigid insulation and the CMU. So I'm going to go to the region tool. And in the region tool, I'm going to take a look at this diagonal crosshatch. Let's try the crosshatch again. And we'll do an edit. And I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to call it I'll call it rigid insulation, something like that, and say okay. And in this case, I'm just going to choose the regular crosshatch and say okay. All right, now I'll just test this out with a rectangle. Click on the check mark. So that I want to make sure that the graphics are the same between the two, and they are. So I'll delete that. Okay. I'm going to go to the region tool, and I'm going to just use overrides this time. We'll do nearest. It doesn't really matter if there's a little gap between the wall. It's going to be so small. I'm trying to make this, I'll go back to snap overrides, nearest, about 5 inches or so. If you wanted to make this exactly 5 inches, you could do that. So here, back to down, check mark. Okay, there we go. Okay, now for this one here, I could edit the boundary and click on this and change this to an invisible line. And click on the check mark. Okay. So who knows what's causing that? Let's try that again. Edit boundary. Click on the line. It says it's invisible. Okay, it may be part of the lower assembly, and it could be that if I was to bring the line down a little bit further, that it would disappear. Yeah. Okay, so there we have our Cant strip. Okay. So next we'll bring in the counter flashing. So you're going to go to Insert, Load Autodesk Family, search for flashing. And you should find one that says wall flashing toward the bottom. We're going to bring that in. Okay. So go to Annotate, Components, and we're going to need to mirror it, but we can get it placed. Now, I think we don't have enough space to let the membrane come in here, so we'll put this flashing in the joint above, and then I'm going to mirror it. erase the original one. Move this down 3/16 of an inch so that it is centered in the joint. And then we'll have a membrane that comes up and underneath it. Okay, now for our membrane, we will draw a detail line, put it on the medium, and I'm basically going to make a line that kind of comes up and under here, and I'm going to use the snap overrides nearest to place it roughly underneath the counter flashing. And I'll take that line and I'll move it, click on it, move it over maybe 1/8 of an inch. Like that, 1/8 of an inch. And maybe want to add another line. I'm going to go to annotate detail line, draw one that is also parallel to that. And that is roughly parallel to the top of my rigid insulation. Now we're going to do a little bit of work to our waffle slab. So one thing that you'll find as you get into the level of detail that we're doing right now is that there are things that you would want to change in the overall design of the structure. So again, we're trying to work with the courses of the materials that we have. And you'll notice that the bottom of this pan joist, I'm going to click on this here. It's a 5x14. And the module, along with what we're using for the slab above, doesn't really work within the system of the 8-inch modules of the CMU. So we are at this point going to make a little change, and we'll assume that this kind of custom work is something that is doable given our budget. This again is a 5x14, and we are going to edit the type, and we're going to change this. So before I go and do that, what I would do was to check to see what's the dimension that I'm working with here. So I'm going to right click, snap overrides, perpendicular, 1 5/8. So I need to add the depth of 1 5/8 to my pan joist here. So I'm going to click on it, edit the type, and I'll just add 3 points. I'll just change to 3.65 1/8. And then I'll also rename it. I'll call it 15 3/8. Now, maybe it's easier to thicken the slab above or make these other revisions, but basically what I want to illustrate is that you want to show in these details also sort of the design intent. So now I have this alignment, and I have a spot for the joints here, the mortar joint. All right, now the detail here, somehow we need a place for this waffle slab to bear on our load-bearing walls here. And right now, you know, with Revit, you just kind of like show things to the interior face of a structure or something like that. Because we don't have a way of properly showing this through, you know, the horizontal and vertical components of Revit, we're going to have to add some detail work to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a region, and we're going to give it some shape. So I'm going to try to approximate the profile of this angle right here. So basically, I've drawn just a temporary line here, and I'm going to check a distance from here to the perpendicular to the line. So what does it say? You know, it's roughly an inch, some weird fraction, right? So what I'll do then is I'll create a region that basically has that that same 1-inch offset from my wall, and I'll make a whole area here that is concrete. So technically I can eliminate these 2 blocks because I'm going to make a concrete edge beam here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to detail line, and I'll try to find something to snap to here. Okay, I'm going to move this line over 1 inch. So I have something to there. All right, now what am I going to do? I'm going to create a region. My region is going to be concrete, and I will snap. You will let me grab that. I may have to do this in multiple passes and make some small adjustments, but basically I want to go to, let's see what it lets me identify an intersection here. There we go. And then I'm going to go to the top of my slab here. And this point. And let's see, let's not override perpendicular here. And then snap overrides perpendicular to this point here. And I'm going to take this line and I'll drag it over there. And so I have, basically I've tried to match that angle. And I'll click on the check mark. And I can erase this line now. And then like I did before, I'll click on this, edit the boundary, pick this line, and then I'll make it invisible. Check mark. Okay. So that's, I think, a nicer detail seeing those alignments. I'm also going to add some reinforcing the same way that reinforcing was added here. I will add some to, let's see, what do we got? Hidden 3/32 street. I'll add that to the slab. So do a detail line, 3/32 -3. I'll move it up. Let's see, let's check what's my slab thickness here. 4.5 inches. I'm going to move it up 2 inches. Okay. And I'll also stretch it over here a little bit. Okay. I'll also add some rebar in the bottom of it. Maybe we'll add 2 of them, but maybe I go with a smaller one. Let's just check the dimension here, 5 inches. Okay, I'll go to components. I'll look for some rebar. Let's make this number 4s instead of number 6s. Let's move these. Inches. Move it from up. And maybe and I'll mirror it. Okay, and we'll add some to this beam as well. Given that it's a perimeter one and it's a little heftier, I'm going to go ahead and add the number 6s like I've used elsewhere.
get into one of my inch increments. I'll make a copy of that. Over. Oops. Copy. And I'm going to make copies of these two 10 inches up. And this one maybe has some rebar that wraps around those. Again, this is kind of doing a little bit more work than the intermediate ones. So I will use the detail line, and I'll make a square there, and then I'll offset it. Now we have the floor rebar and another reinforcing element that wraps around them, and we have the reinforcing in the middle of the waffle slab. So I'm now in the sheet for the masonry structure details, and this is A301. And everything is looking good so far. But I did a test print because I wanted to see how the graphics looked, and they need some work. I'm going to share that with you. So this is the sheet. And one thing that became apparent really immediately is that the line work in the Revit file, what we see on the screen, is different than what is printing. Some things we want to be heavy, but others we don't. For example, the CMU and the brick are just way, way too heavy. So we're losing detail that we might want to use to show things. So I'm going to work with some of the settings in Revit to sort of bring down those line types so they're not so heavy. So I'm on the Manage ribbon, and I'm going to go to Object Styles. I already changed the weight for cut lines in walls to 2. I think the default is 5. And this will impact not these details, but the floor plans. The line weights will be a little lighter. I'm going to go up here to where it says detail items and expand that. So I'm going to change both the heavy lines to 2 and also the medium lines to 2. Okay, and I'm going to apply and say okay to that. And then I'm going to create a new print and compare the two. So I'll show you the before and after. This here is what it looked like before I changed the settings. And this is after. So you can see, things are a lot lighter. There's still a few things that maybe could be dropped down a little bit, but we can continue to make little adjustments to that. I go down here, you can see the top of the ground is perhaps too heavy, and the cut profile of the slab is different than some of the other boundaries. So we'll start working on some of those other items next. So I'm back in the object styles, and I'm going to change the topography. Let's try that also at 2. Because there's so much detail, you really don't need to have extremely heavy lines. So I also changed the structural framing and the foundations. I dropped them down to 2. So you can see now the footing is lighter. I still need to work on the structural slab there, or the slab on grade. So I'm going to change now the floor to 2, and that should take care of that structural slab. So here's how the slab looked before, and here's how it looks now with that adjustment. And if I go up to the top here, the lines of the slab portion of the waffle slab were a little heavy, and now they are a little bit lighter. Okay, we'll make some more adjustments as we go along, but I just want to sort of introduce that as something that you can change settings of. So that's it for this set of assignments. The only drawing that you're going to need to print for this one is this A301 sheet. And we'll come back to this at a later time.